Well, good evening, fellow heretics. Welcome to tonight's episode of Nerds and Heresy. I'm your host, Captain Dadpool, and my usual co-host, Natty Nat, is not with us tonight because she is not feeling well. So thank you so much, Genevieve. I reached out, freaking out. I was like, I have Dr. Bart Ehrman himself to entertain for 2 hours, and I need help. And she was like, yeah, definitely. So she's doing me a huge favor by jumping in last minute. So thank you, Jen.
Hey, not a problem. You don't have to twist my arm to have a conversation with Bart Ehrman. Are you kidding me? And
Right?
you too. You too.
Oh, yeah. And by the way, today marks the 1 year anniversary of the show, and Dr. Ehrman is going to be helping us celebrate tonight. So without further ado, let's bring him in. But first, let's watch that intro.
Hold on to your butts.
Hey, there we go.
Wow.
All right. Let's see.
Cool intro.
Thank you. Cost me $200. It was worth every penny. And then I learned how to use Canva, and I was like, I could have probably made that myself.
Yeah.
But anyway, so welcome, Dr. Ehrman. Thank you so much for coming. This was an 8-month, or this has been in the works for like 8 months. You were in London, and then we had the Christmas thing happen, and well, finally we got you on, and you carved out some time for us. You got a big debate coming up with Dr. Michael Acona.
Yeah. Yes, indeed.
Let me, where did I put that? Hold on. I wanted to bring that up. Oops. I need a secretary. I need something.
You do. Or a producer. You do too much. And you're a dad. Oh, come on.
You should be a university professor. None of us knows how to do this stuff either.
Oh, I worked in IT while I was in college, and I was very bad at it.
Okay.
And yeah, I was constantly having to fix professor stuff.
I was going to say, have you tried turning it off and on again? But I don't want you to shut down the show.
We had some guys in the IT department make a music video, and it was like, turn it off and on again. Anyway. So yeah, you have a debate coming up with Dr. Michael Acona. It is going to take place on April 9th. There was an early bird special that will cost $39.95. Now, this is going to be an all-day long thing. Like, you'll be able to take naps in between, sessions, and you'll be able to, heat up your popcorn. I posted a link in the description to it, as well as a link to Dr. Ehrman's website. I highly, highly recommend his blog. I'm in that thing almost every day looking up stuff. So if you click the link, I'll get a little kickback for that. So thank you. But more importantly, I will be able to dethrone Paulogia and Derek, which is what I'm really in it for. So register. It's going to be on the resurrection of Jesus. And has anyone else done anything like this, Dr. Ehrman? Like an all day long live debate thing?
Not that I know of.
Yeah, I've never heard of anything like this.
Idea. But I think the format looks pretty interesting. And the thing about these debates usually is you say your thing, they object, they say your thing, you object, and you go home. And this time we can actually get some, really get into it. And it's gonna be there's a lot of issues here, a lot of issues. It isn't just like, was he raised from the dead? Yes, no, it's not like that. It's like we're really going to get into stuff.
You're getting into the weeds of it. Yeah.
And, about the Gospels, like, can you trust these things as historical sources at all, or some, or completely, and can historians do things like talk about whether miracles happen? How many historians of World War II talk about the Allies winning because God intervened? I mean, so what historians do, and so why do we do that? So that's the kind of lots of things.
I'm very excited for it. By the way, hi everybody in the chat. Thank you so much for joining. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them. If you send it via super chat, it will get priority. But yeah, this is just going to be a fun, casual hangout thing. So if you have any questions for him, now's your chance. I guess I'll start though, because and Jen gave me this advice. I was like, I don't know how to even start. And she was like, well, what everyone's talking about right now is the end of the world. And She's absolutely right. And I was like, hey, he just so happens to have a book on Revelation coming out soon. Which, by the way, when is that coming out?
Not till next year. It'll be.
Oh,
It's weird that
the world will be over by then. I won't get to read it.
Yeah, right. I know. Yeah, well, it might well be, but yeah. So it's weird about publishing a book because when you finish the book, it's not done. And so I finished the book months and months ago, and now my editors finally gave me the edits. So I'm doing the edits now, but it takes about a year from the time you actually give them the final product. It takes about a year for a book to show up, typically. So yeah. So but it is, it's about the book is about expecting the end of the world, and it's about the book of Revelation and how people have misread Revelation in order to understand how, when is the end coming? Is it going to be on Thursday or Friday? And so so the book is about how it's about expecting the end. It's about expecting Armageddon, but how people have misused Revelation for that. And I try to show why that's not the way Revelation ought to be interpreted. But then I go on to talk about what Revelation is really about, and that's scary too. And so that's yeah. So it'll be out. It's supposed to be out in I don't know, March or something, sometime before Easter.
So that so from what I understand, you were saying that it was just as scary for them. I've been asked by what's weird about dealing with atheists who have left Christianity is they still maintain like they're still afraid of hell, even though they don't believe in it. They're still afraid of it, or when everything's going down in Ukraine right now, they're afraid. Is this what Revelation was talking about? So they still have that fear. And I try to respond by saying, here's what you need to understand about Revelation is it was not written for us. The author thought that this was going to happen to him, or at least shortly after him, because they believed like Christ was going to return. Nero was the Antichrist who was going to return first, because it was written probably after he died. And that's because they thought he was going to return, and he was not a very good dude. And they were very scared of that happening. Is that fair to say, or am I off?
No, I mean, I think it's fair to say the problem is that evangelical Christian, conservative evangelicals, of which I also was one for a long time.
Dr. Josh.
I was an evangelical Christian who believed that the Book of Revelation was predicting our future back in the 1970s. The best-selling book in the entire 1970s, nonfiction book of any kind whatsoever, was Late Great Planet Earth by Hal Lindsey, which argued that the Jesus would come back before the end of the 1980s, and I believed it. We all believed it, and so whatever happens in the world, that's fulfilling the prophecies. And so when Saddam Hussein was around, he's the Antichrist. When Hitler was around, he's the Antichrist. Mussolini, he's the Antichrist. And now, and so you just go on. And whenever there's a war, oh my God, that's the one that was predicted. And so, people have been saying that forever. And part of my book is I trace the history of people saying that. And it's not just like, 1970s fundamentalists. I mean, it goes back to, it goes way back.
Yeah.
The Middle Ages and stuff.
Oh my gosh. You're so right. I mean, just for some background, since I know that you and Captain Dadpool have spoken before, but unlike both of you, I was never a Christian ever in my life. I am sort of a lifelong atheist. I'm a cradle atheist, but I moved actually to your neck of the woods, Bart. I was in North Carolina in the Bible Belt. And that was the first time that I really experienced evangelical Christianity, and it blew my mind. But, your books were so influential to me because, when I wanted to make sense of everything, I just stumbled upon you, and I've been a member of your blog for years. But the funny thing that I find about these end times prophecies is, oh shucks, are we doing this now? If you're still afraid of hell, there's a book for that. I guess
one of my favorites.
It's interesting seeing so many people freaking out about the end times, just from my perspective, because I know we've had COVID and we have this terrible war in Ukraine, but I've always just thought, like, what did people living during the Black Plague feel? When has there ever been a peaceful time? Remember when a cut on your leg could kill you just from infection? I have always had a hard time wrapping my mind around how people can be so afraid of this. But understanding how important the Bible is to people and the misconceptions about Revelations, coupled with just fear.
Yeah.
Gosh.
Yeah. No, it's interesting how these people, they call themselves prophecy writers because they're conservative Christians who are trying to show how the prophecies are coming true. And it's actually kind of humorous if you could step back a bit. There's a guy named Jack Van Impe who's one of these guys, and in the early 70s, he wrote this book about trying to explain the signs that it's all coming true, that it's going to happen any time now. He goes through this whole list of signs. It's definitely going to happen in 5 years, but I'd say maybe more like 3. So 5 years later happened, and it's like nothing happened. So 20 years later, he writes another book, and it says the signs are showing that all will be fulfilled as the same damn signs. The same ones it was 20 years ago. There's immorality and rock music and whatever. It's like, what?
Wars and rumors of wars.
Yeah, there's a rumor of a war. Oh my God.
It's an ambiguity fallacy.
I think we are in a horrible situation now, obviously, especially with Ukraine. And God knows. I mean, at some point or other, we're all going to cease to exist. We just would rather it be in about 1 billion years instead of like next week.
The dog's being cute behind you.
Yeah, dog is a little bit lonely.
Oh my goodness!
You're thrashing around a stuffed doll. That's adorable. I have a dog that does the exact same thing. So,
okay.
Sorry.
Yeah.
That reminds me a lot of what was his name? Steve Weisenant, who wrote
Edward Weisenant.
Edward Weisenant, that's right. Who wrote 88 Reasons Why the World's Going to End in 88, and he was a NASA nuclear physicist or something like that, and he had that shit down. He had everybody convinced, but he was off by one number, and then he was like, "Oh, I forgot, you guys. They used a different calendar back then, so it's actually going to happen next year." And then
Genevieve, when I moved to North Carolina, I don't know where you live, Genevieve. Was it in more of a rural area?
Yeah, I was in Southern Pinehurst area.
Okay, well So when I moved here from New Jersey, and I'd been teaching at Rutgers, and there were not Bible thumping Christians, kind of all over the place. There were a few here and there. So, but I moved here, and 2 weeks after I get here, I get a phone call from somebody at the Raleigh News and Observer, a reporter, who wanted to know if it was true that Jesus is coming back in September.
Oh, I'm blurry.
Because Edgar Weisenant had written this book, and he argued it wasn't 1980. It was going to be during the festival of Rosh Hashanah in 1988. It was going to be between September 21st and September 23rd, and he had these 88 proofs based on the Bible and philosophy and common sense, and the thing was, even a lot of the fundamentalists said to him, "Look, Jesus says that no one knows the day or the hour when the end will come." And Weisenant said, "No." He said, "Look, it's absolutely right. I don't know the day or the hour. I just know the week."
Oh, those loopholes. Ricky and I were talking about some loopholes before the show. I mean, I feel like I something that kind of blew my mind that I learned, in the past couple of years since I've delved into this world of evangelical Christianity and what the fuck's going on with the Bible was the Great Disappointment with William Miller. I mean, I had no idea that the entire Seventh-day Adventist Church was based on this rather embarrassing situation. I feel
there were like 33 split offs from this thing.
Yeah. I mean, it was crazy, and I feel like when I look at this, this historical record of so many people saying, "Oh, believe me, it's the end times. Oh, it didn't happen. Well, it's actually this date." I mean, we all know that classic Parks and Rec skit with the reasonableists. So it is, from an outside perspective, it is funny. But for evangelical Christians, I can also recognize that this holds very real power and very real fear and can cause a lot of trauma.
No, when the Weisenant thing happened, I was teaching a class that semester in UNC, in a New Testament class or something. And I had a student in my class whose parents literally sold the farm.
Yeah.
And
a lot of people did things like that.
Yeah. So, and the Great Disappointment you're talking about is this 19th century thing. There are thousands and thousands and thousands of people who completely devastated. And after that, very few people pick a date, but people still, most evangelicals just say, look, we don't know when, but it's coming soon. But it's because when they picked a date, it didn't work well. But even in modern, recent times, I don't know if you remember Harold Camping, but he was, he had everybody he had thousands and thousands of followers, and he just, picked a date, and whoops, May 21st, came and went.
Yeah, I believe Pat Robertson said 2006, but he's still around, so I don't know.
Yeah.
He also said that God told him that Trump was going to win the election, and then it didn't. But
yeah, oh well, yeah, it was a bad connection.
Yeah, that's what it was. So they had some stat. God was going through a tunnel. And,
Yeah.
So I had a question, Dr. Ehrman. Do you remember the evangelists at the Rutgers bus stop?
Rutgers
bus stop. Yeah.
I'm actually not familiar.
Yeah, so Rutgers is a big university. They have different campuses, and you have to take a bus from one place to another, which makes it hard if you've got the class that one right after. But you get on the bus and you get there. But yeah, they're evangelists. They're doing their thing, and yeah, they didn't have much success. We have the same thing at UNC. We have in front of the student store at UNC, the bookstore, like a kind of a pit. They call it a pit. It's about 3 steps down on all sides. Big place. And there's always there's often a pit preacher in there. So they call them the pit preachers. And usually they're just haranguing the students for being immoral, and subscribe to liberal views and things and going to hell. And it's a little bit strange because they're just like they've never converted anybody that I know of. And in fact, the students just go in there and make fun of them. But they feel like, they're serving God doing this. And so, yes, I do remember the evangelists at Rutgers. And I think a lot of universities have that. So.
Yeah. You probably have an interesting perspective being like a product of, just like Dave Warnock does, Jen, of being an evangelical in the 70s and watching. Like, I can remember, like, early 2000s is when I was Christian, and then like how much has changed since then is like mind-blowing to me. So how much crazier is it, watching how things evolve from an outsider's perspective, going all the way back to the 70s? What is that like
in evangelical Christianity?
Yeah,
I mean, yeah. So I actually try not to keep up to it with too much. There have been surprises to me. One thing the thing that surprised me the most is not a bad thing. It's actually a good thing. When I was a conservative evangelical, we're completely insistent on this particular view of the Bible. The Bible is inerrant. There are no mistakes of any kind in it. That whole thing has changed. Now you get these conservative evangelicals are saying things like hell doesn't really exist. There's not a literal hell, and there are problems with the Bible, but they're not like severe. But they're admitting things, and they'll even, some will even say, like this fellow I'm debating on April 9th, Michael Licona, he said that there are passages in the Gospels that didn't really happen, and there are contradictions, but it's still inerrant.
Yeah, how does that work? Speaking, I got to give a shout out to Dave. He said, if I come to UNC, I'll give you a copy of my memoir, Dr. Ehrman. I mentioned you in it. Dave just had a book come out telling his life story. You know who Dave is, Dr. Ehrman?
No, I'm afraid I don't.
Okay. He has a website called Dying Out Loud, and he has ALS, and he was a devout Christian for like 30, 40 years. He was a pastor, and he left the faith and became an atheist. And now he's sharing his story, while he can, because he probably only has a couple, years left. So he wrote a memoir, and it's really good. I haven't finished it yet. Jen did.
Yeah, I finished it in a day, and then I wanted to pick it right back up again.
Finished it in a day? Jesus, how do you people do that?
Hyper focus, man. I had a long drive.
That's what it is.
Yeah, I don't have kids, no. And I was driving back from North Carolina to where I live now in Maryland. So had a long drive, 6 hours. It was great. It was really nice.
No.
I don't do it.
Well, that's quite a story. No, I'm afraid I don't. I don't. Yeah.
How do you feel about? Sorry, go ahead, Jen.
No. I mean, I was just going to say, sort of off the cuff, like, I can't even imagine how busy your schedule is. I mean, you've written, I know it's over 20 books, but how many books is it now at this present day?
Revelation will be the 34th.
Oh my gosh.
Written or edited.
Yeah.
And, that's a problem. Yeah, I don't observe the world as much as I should.
No, I think
it's not a bad thing though.
It's really not. It's really not. I mean, wow, 34 books, and you're a professor, and you do these debates, and I can only imagine how busy you are. And I've also been trying to encourage people with everything that is going on, is that you don't always have to read the news. You can focus on your own little world and take care of yourself. So I would keep on keeping on, because you are doing a fantastic job.
Well, thank you. I mean, a few years ago, I was watching MSNBC 3 hours every night and stuff. And I was having dinner with a guy who'd been like a executive for one of the news companies, and he said, "Well, what's your news habits?" And I said, "I watch MSNBC 3 hours." He said, "Oh God, don't do that." he was Dan Rather's boss. He was like president. And he said, "Yeah, don't do that." And so then I thought, it's just crazy, because it's just so damn depressing. Why do I do this to myself? And it doesn't matter who's in power. It's just depressing the whole time. So I do keep up on the news. I mean, I keep closely on the big stuff, but no, I don't. I know I don't watch. I never watch TV. I just don't.
I think the only reason we're so plugged into what's happening with the church is because we're on TikTok, and we see all the it's interesting, Dr. Ehrman being on this app and being a former Christian, especially when he was educated in the Bible, is watching all these different. There's Calvinists attacking Protestants, attacking Catholics, attacking progressive Christians, and they're all like, and there's Muslims arguing, and they're all fighting with each other over whose interpretation of what is correct. And we're just over here like, oh my God, not my circus, not my monkeys. Don't say, like, you're all wrong. But it's fun to sit back and
the closer you are to somebody, the more you argue with them, right? I mean, the people you have the most arguments with are your lover, your spouse, or your siblings, or your parents. They're the ones you really argue with. The person you don't know across the street, you just like, forget. So these arguments within circles, it's like, wow, that's weird. I thought you all thought the same thing. Oh no, they don't. And so But it's interesting that the other thing with standard Christianity, of course, is that the Holy Spirit teaches you all truth, and so that if you the Spirit guides you the truth, and so these churches will say that, but then they disagree with the church next door, and so it turns out we're the only ones being guided by the Spirit.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. If you looked at Christianity as a whole and apply the no true Scotsman fallacy, you would have a million Spider-Man memes just pointing at each other. Everybody thinks that their way is the right way. And I have kind of a question too. Because I've like I said, I've read many of your books, and you always do sort of have this forward going through your history, going to Moody, and then going to Princeton, and it sounds like, from what I recall, your Christianity really sort of rested on the Bible being inerrant, or at least, being a Christian, you believed that, oh, well, if this is the Word of God, then I better know this better than anything else. This is the most important thing. And I'm wondering, when you first realized that the Bible may not be inerrant, was that a huge, emotional shock for you? I understand that you did keep your faith for quite a while after that. It sort of evolved. But I know that in the circle that, Captain Dadpool and I have, it's a lot of Christians that are just kind of healing from these sort of revelations, if you will.
Yeah. So, I wasn't raised a conservative evangelical. I was raised in the Episcopal Church, and we were kind of socialite Episcopalians. and not heavily theological or anything, just went to church. And but then I had this born again experience in high school, and that's when I developed this kind of passion for the Bible. And it's why I went to Moody Bible Institute, because I just thought, it's the most important thing I can do is learn the Bible. And so I just became this kind of crazy student of the Bible. And I did think the Bible was inerrant. And when I came to realize that there were errors in the Bible in graduate school, it was very troubling. But I stayed, as you said, I stayed a Christian for a long time. I mean, I was counting this up because I actually wrote a blog post on this this morning on this issue, because a lot of evangelicals who try to explain why I left Christianity.
Oh yeah.
I came to, once I realized the Bible was not inerrant, then I gave up. I became an agnostic, which is just wrong. It's just wrong. And so I calculated the other night that so I was probably a Christian till I was 40, from the time I was conscious. So whatever that would be, 35 years, say, and only 6 of those was I a fundamentalist. And then, so after I realized that the Bible, actually was, at least had human elements in it, then eventually I came to think completely human. I was still a Christian. I mean, I was a Christian while I was teaching at Chapel Hill, but I didn't think the Bible was inerrant. And so when people say, well, yeah, once you gave up inerrancy, you threw out the baby with the bathwater. No, you know nothing about it. It's not true. But it was a bit of a, it did change things when I started realizing that the Bible had mistakes in it, because then I didn't have this absolute blueprint for how I should live my life, what I should believe, what was going to happen to me when I died. I realized the Bible has different authors with different opinions, and they have different views of things. And if that's the case, then which one's right, or are they all wrong? And they can't all be right if they're disagreeing with each other. And so that was a lot of turmoil. But I mean, it was nothing like the turmoil when I left the faith. I was like, oh my God, what am I doing? And that was the emotional turmoil for me, more than giving up my fundamentalism.
Yeah, that's what we get a lot of, like you're saying, a lot of people. Like I have a large following on TikTok, and so because I have all these Christian apologists who like try to like psychoanalyze me and like explain why I left the faith. Like they'll watch all my videos and try to come up with some equation, and they're always wrong, because they're like, oh, he left because he wanted to sin, or he left because he never believed in the first place, no true Scotsman. But it's like, no, it's not. I didn't leave because I wanted to. I didn't want to leave the faith. Like I think Dr. Ehrman, you said you left kicking and screaming.
Or
at least a couple of your books. Like you don't leave because you want to.
Well, I mean, sometimes people do, but it's like I think these apologists who say things like that are just trying to, they're trying to explain it away by making a caricature, because they don't really want to look at the deep problem, because they have the same deep problems, they just won't recognize it. Because they don't want to, and they think, well, there must be a problem with you then. If you I mean, when I left the faith, it wasn't about any of this biblical stuff at all. It was about why they're suffering in the world. And the apologists can go on and on about, inerrancies, but they've got a big problem when it comes to suffering. And I think if people don't recognize it, if they don't grapple with it, then they're just kind of putting their head in the sand.
Yeah. It's really fun trying to watch them try to figure it out, and it's like you're not going to understand it until you go through it yourself.
The suffering,
Well, like leaving your faith, leaving something that you spend the majority of your life involved in, that all your friends and family are involved in, and you leave because you just don't, you can't think that way anymore. It's not a choice you're making. It's kind of just something that happens.
Yeah, not to put any sort of comedic spin on it, because I do understand that it's very traumatic, but it does seem like sort of that Wile E. Coyote situation where you're just running and you can't stop, and suddenly you're off the cliff and you look down and you have no choice but to fall.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. I was, I think, I had several moments when I realized this wasn't working for me anymore. But one of them, I was in a I'd gone back to the Episcopal Church when I was no longer a evangelical. And I was in the Episcopal Church here in Chapel Hill for a number of years, and we teach education, adult education and stuff. But I was in the church, and in the Episcopal Church, they say the Nicene Creed. I believe in God the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth, and you go through the creed. And I realized during this particular worship service that the only words I could say in this entire creed was, "He suffered under Pontius Pilate, was dead and buried." It's like I couldn't say anything else. God and Christ, and it's like I thought, man, I don't belong here. It's like I don't even. All I think is there was a Jesus who died. It's like,
I imagine you take the Jefferson Bible and then just redact it even further. But I do see that Dave had asked, we talked about, your deconversion, but looking back, what do you think the born again experience was? What was that real introduction going from, Episcopalian, which in my experience is really, they're pretty cool. They're pretty cool guys. To I need to take this really seriously and go to Moody Bible Institute.
Yeah. So I when I was in high school, I was a pretty active kid in high school in various ways, but I started going to a group that met on a week evening where they do kind of a social event and then have this kind of spiritual lesson. And so it was a Campus Life Youth for Christ group. And there are other guys I knew at this thing, and girls, and people I thought were pretty interesting and cool, and so I would go, but they'd have this little thing at the end, and this guy would talk about having to commit yourself to Christ or you're not really a Christian. I thought I was a Christian. I go to church every week. I'm an altar boy in the church. It's like I say my prayers, I confess my sins, I sing the hymns. What do you want? And apparently I was lacking, and he was a persuasive guy. He convinced me. And so being born again at that point, for me, I suppose for a lot of people, meant asking Jesus into your heart. And then you have this new born again experience. And I think if you've heard repeatedly that this is something that's really important, and if you do it, you'll be a transformed human being, that there's a kind of a psychological catharsis that happens, and you just feel energized. You feel energized. And for me, it was just like, it was interesting on all sorts of levels. But among other things, I mean, it's guaranteed I would go to heaven despite, whatever everyone else is going to happen to them. And I had the truth and they didn't. And so it ends up being this kind of, I don't know, it's not one-upmanship, but it's this thing where you just like, now I know the truth.
Yeah, I know something you don't know.
Sorry about you, but I've got the truth. I've got reality at my fingertips. Forget science. What science? No, forget science. This is like I got the truth here.
Gosh.
And looking back on it, sorry, go ahead, Jen.
No. I mean, I was just gonna say really quickly, and then please, Ricky, please. It's interesting that you mentioned that there's like this catharsis of like, wow, I've accepted Jesus, but it's sort of like predicated on this, you're not good enough, like you aren't right the way that you are. That's an interesting dichotomy, and pretty. I mean, from like I said, from a cradle atheist perspective, that's really twisted, and I'm so sorry to both of you.
Well, I still think most people really screwed up, and so I still think that. But the idea that like the creator of the universe is really ticked off at me for being screwed up, and it's like I was born this way. It was like, and so it's not healthy. It's not healthy. It's not healthy, and it comes out in all sorts of ways, including, part of the function of dogmatism, of where you're insisting you're right, everybody else is wrong, is that it eases the fact that that you're messed up, because you've got the answers now, and even though you're messed up, at least you're trying, and God's forgiven you. And these other schmucks, sorry, you're going to hell. So there's actually a lot psychologically involved with it, I think.
Oh yeah, my thinking, looking back on it now, is like it's almost like being born again is an initiation into a secret club. Like you hear about like these initiations in other cults or gangs. It's just like that. Like you have all these people surrounding you, and they're like, say this phrase, like bow your head, put your hands together, You have to mean it now. Make sure you mean it, because if you don't, God will know. So say this, and then you're one of us now. Like you don't realize it at the time, but that's exactly what it is. Is you're achieving the social acceptance that you've secretly been craving for so long.
Yeah, that's right. And it's sometimes it even goes farther. I mean, when I was I guess maybe a year or two after I was born again, I got involved with the charismatic group that, people were speaking in tongues and doing miracles and things, and you had to have the gift of the Spirit.
My people.
And so one level up, right? And then, so it's, and so I went through that whole thing. And that was also, I mean, that's like, some of us can speak in tongues, and sorry, you can't, but, I've received the Holy Spirit. It's amazing it stops anywhere, really. You just think they'd keep going up and up and up. I guess they run out of things to
Yeah.
Yeah, I went to I actually went to 2 different colleges. I did 2 years at Johnson Bible College in Knoxville, Tennessee. And I couldn't afford it anymore, and I joined the military, and then I used a GI Bill to finish. I did 4 more years at Valley Forge, or the University of Valley Forge. But that school was non-denominational, but it was primarily associated with the Church of Christ. And I was the only one there who came from a charismatic Pentecostal church. And I went there because I had a great grandfather who went there, and he recently died. And I was like, I'll go there. And everyone was really standoffish towards me once they found out I was from the Assemblies of God, or I was charismatic Pentecostal. Yeah. And I couldn't understand why. For probably sometime in the second semester, someone was just like we were all hanging out in a group, and someone was like, "Hey, I got a question for you. No judgment. I'm genuinely curious. Do you think we're all going to hell because we don't speak in tongues?" And I was like, "What? No. Is that what everybody's been thinking about me this whole time on this entire campus? There's that crazy charismatic Pentecostal guy who thinks we're all going to hell because we don't speak in tongues." I was like, "No, that's not what my church believed anyway. That's not what my church taught." Yeah, but that was the impression that they had. So I was like,
do you know whether because some Church of Christ people think that if you're not Church of Christ, you're going to go to hell.
Yeah, and there's some Church of Christ that believe if you worship with their a cappella only, Church of Christ, if you play a musical instrument during worship, you're going to hell, because they never did that in the New Testament. Yeah, I know David played the harp and lyre and all that in the Old Testament. But the New Testament, there's no mention of musical instruments. So if you want to worship, it's sing only.
Yeah, there's no mention of church pews either, but they still have those.
Yeah, interesting, right? But no mention of baptism. Anyway.
At Moody, when I went to Moody, I was charismatic, and I quickly found out that they thought that the spiritual gifts were not legitimate, and that it's bad theology, and that in fact people who speak in tongues were possessed by demons. And so this is one of those splits kind of within the community, because they're both very, very conservative, believe in the Bible and all of that, but they had this split. And at Moody, there was you have on your floor of your dorm, you've got a what do you call an RA, a resident assistant. And they've got, at Moody, they had this, by the phone of the residence assistants, they had like emergency numbers, right? In case of a fire, do this, theft, do this, this list. And the bottom it said, in case of charismatic activity, do this. Call this number. And it was serious.
Oh my goodness.
In case it's charismatic, it's like getting a fire in the door. It's, oh my
really?
God.
And they were being serious.
Wow.
Religious persecution. It's coming from the inside.
That's it. I tell you.
The call's coming from inside the house.
The angel of light. Satan is an angel of light.
Yep. Oh my Lord.
We had a fun question from Iron Cherry Deer. If you could time travel to the past, but just for one day, where would you go? Or I guess where and when would you go?
Yeah, go ahead. You first.
Oh, Jesus. I don't know. I would really like to have been the fly on the wall at the Council of Nicaea. Just to hear those debates and arguments,
Yeah.
how that went down. Because from what I understand, Constantine was present, but he didn't say much until a few hours into it, and then from some accounts he appeared to become bored, and so then he started pushing for the creed that he had been given prior. So I'd love to.
It's, well, it was a long council. It wasn't a day, it was months, and they Constantine thinks about this kind of what a lot of people think today, which is that the controversy was over such a minor little trivial thing. He couldn't believe it. There's another issue with the churches splitting, but he had to solve this problem because, I think Constantine had a genuine conversion. I think he really did consider himself a Christian, but he was not a philosopher or a theologian. And Arius and his bishop Alexander were debating about, in what sense is Jesus God from eternity past? And the nuances were very refined. And Constantine actually wrote both of them a letter that we still have, where he says, "This is so trivial, just solve it." But they couldn't. So then he has the Council of Nicaea, and Arius ends up losing this thing. But what Constantine did is he twisted the arms of the bishops who agreed with Arius so that they would, and so they're only out of several hundred people. There were only a couple at the end who resisted. But yeah, it'd be really interesting being on those debates just to hear, because the arguments were really very. You and I would have trouble understanding these arguments because they're really very sophisticated philosophically.
Yeah, they were.
In ways
they knew their stuff.
People today think, well, like Jesus is God. How stupid can you get? Yeah, well, you should read some of this theology sometime if you think it's stupid. It is not stupid. It is like really, really smart. It's just like with a whole set of presuppositions we wouldn't share. And so just because they don't agree with our assumptions about the world doesn't mean they're dumb. They were actually extremely smart. So for my time travel, I actually have a definite day in mind and place. I want to be around Jesus the day before he gets arrested.
Is that because of Judas and the conflicting accounts of?
No, I want to know what Jesus is really saying.
What are the different arguments among scholars on that?
Oh, well, no. I mean, look, if you're a Christian, you think Jesus is saying that he had to die for the sins of the world, and so and so here I go, but I don't think he's saying that. I didn't think Jesus thought he was going to get arrested. I mean, he didn't go to Jerusalem to die. I think in my reconstruction of it, what probably was happening was that Jesus spent most of his time up in Galilee, which is like 100 miles north. So he's never been down to the big city at all. He's up in the north in these rural areas, and he probably doesn't have a huge following. I don't think historically. I mean, he does in the Gospels, but I don't think he did historically. And he's getting some converts, and he feels an urgency. He needs to get Jews to repent because God's kingdom is soon going to come, and if they don't repent, they're going to be fried, literally. And so so I think he goes to Jerusalem in order to have a big crowd for his message, because he's declaring that God is soon going to overthrow the Romans and overthrow all of his enemies, and there's going to be a good kingdom that comes. And he ends up getting in trouble in Jerusalem and all that. But if you're going to know what Jesus really taught, I think the day before he gets killed would be the time to find out what's he really saying here that gets him into trouble. And the reason it matters is because it changed world history. I mean, it's like there's been nothing like it. I mean, there are 2 billion people who worship this man, and they think something about him that's probably not true historically. And so I would love to hear what was really going down right before he got arrested.
And how much of that had to do with him and what he said, as opposed to what his followers said about him after he died. Because I asked you, I got to interview a little while ago, or last week or so, and I was like, in the Synoptic Gospels, Jesus is pleading with God, let this cup from me pass, or let this cup pass from me. But then John comes around and he says, I must drink of this cup. So it's like the authors, the idea is evolving to be more like he's expecting this and wants this to happen.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's
because I mean, in the synoptics, he knows it's going to happen, and he predicts it 3 times in Matthew and Mark, and 4 times in Luke, and he knows it's going to happen. But at the end in Mark and Matthew, both of them, the earliest 2, yeah, he's completely disgruntled. He goes out and prays and asks God, "No, I don't want this to happen." Prays 3 times, falls on his face and pleads with God, and then he gets arrested and he gets on trial. He doesn't even defend himself, and he just looks like he was shocked the entire way. Until the very end, and at the end in Mark and Matthew, he doesn't say anything the entire time, being crucified, going the way of the crucifixion. At the end, he finally cries out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" and dies. And it's like this, whoa. And he's desperate not to do it. Then it happens. He doesn't know why it's happening. You get to Luke, and it's really modified. Luke's a little bit later, and in Luke, he's not distressed at all. He knows exactly what's happening to him, knows why it's happening to him, knows what's going to happen. He's going to wake up in paradise when this whole thing's over. But then you get to John, as you say, and it's like he's just jumping on the cross. I mean, John uses a bit of gallows humor to talk about Jesus being crucified. In John, Jesus talks about being lifted up. So it's this kind of pun on when you crucify somebody, you actually have to get them up off the ground. But Jesus is using this as an analogy for he's going to be taken back up to heaven. He's going to be lifted up. And so it's the beginning of his return to the heavenly home. So this is, so it changes from him being really upset, very human, really upset, to being, knows what's going on, to being like completely in charge of the whole thing.
Jen, what would be your answer to that question? There's a couple of questions I want to get to, but I want to hear your answer.
I mean, I would say if you have the day before he's arrested covered, I want to be there on the first day that somebody starts the idea that he's coming back, or that he has come back and he's resurrected. I want to, I'm curious. Well, I personally, I'm not nearly as knowledgeable as either of you gentlemen, but I doubt that there was a tomb in the first place. But if there was there angels? Were there women? Was there one person? Was there 2? I mean, there's so much, I think, that is sort of lost in how do we get from this real man to this religious empire. And I want to be there the day that the seeds are planted.
Yeah. Well, I know. That's high on my list too. And the problem is knowing which day it's going to be, because the Gospels, of course, is the 3rd day. But
I guess the question too, is in this time travel scenario, is it like a Back to the Future DeLorean situation where you need to actually plug in an exact date, or can you just give the time traveling universe a general idea and it'll just plop you down at the right spot?
They're going to plop us down the right place, because
the
universe is kind, as we've all noticed. So,
so kind.
But, I think the thing is, I don't think you're going to see anything when you get back to that day, because I think what happened was that one of the disciples thought they saw Jesus, Peter probably, and he saw something, and he interpreted it. So he might have had, he could have actually had a vision of Jesus, or he saw something, but I don't think it was open to public viewing. And he starts saying it then. But it'd be great to know where he was when he said it, because in Mark, it suggests that they flee from Jerusalem and they go back to Galilee, probably right away, because if they've just arrested Jesus and these are the guys who are supporting him, they're probably going to come. So they get out of town.
The cops. Yeah.
And in Matthew, they get out of town, and in Luke, they stay in town. And so it's not. So when Peter has this vision, if he's the one who starts this whole thing, and it may have been Mary, Mary Magdalene. Because in the Gospel, she's the first, right? And so that probably has some kind of old root. Like, why are they saying she was first? And maybe she started saying he got raised. Even in the early church, they talked about Mary Magdalene as the apostle to the apostles, which means she's the one who told the other apostles that he's been raised. It would be interesting if Mary started this whole thing, because I don't think Mary was a big deal during Jesus' ministry. It's not like in the Da Vinci Code or something where they're in love and they get married and have babies.
Damn you, Dan Brown.
But and because she's only mentioned one time in Jesus' entire public ministry in all the Gospels. I mean, it's really just one in passing with two other women. So, but you do have these stories about her being the one at the end, and you wonder if it is because she was, she traveled with him to Jerusalem with some other women, and maybe she said she had a vision, and then Peter had a vision. I don't know.
It's similar to, again, Constantine, because he had this vision. Nobody else had it, but when he had it, he assembled like every religious leader he could find and was like, "Hey, everybody, I had this vision. Tell me what it means." And they all like gave him different ideas. Like, "Oh, this might have been the Christian God."
Yeah, it's complicated with Constantine's visions because we have three sources for them.
Yeah, they're all different. One's like really different.
They all said they knew him. They all knew him personally, and they all said that they got it from him. And there are some things that tie them together. But you're right. I mean, they are confused, and it's interesting because you're right. I mean, he doesn't know what it means, and he has to get advisors in to tell him, which shows like he was not thinking about converting to Christianity. He didn't even know what to make of it. Yeah.
Why would a crucified criminal be given a decent burial? I know the answer to this, but I'll let you answer.
So this is one of those things that I think is highly controversial, and that most of my scholar friends have never even heard of the controversy. My New Testament friends, and so I don't think this is a controversial thing among New Testament scholars. So the deal. So some years ago, back in the early '90s, John Dominic Crossan wrote a book on the historical Jesus, and Crossan identifies as a Christian. He was an Irish Catholic priest who fell in love and left the Catholic Church, but he became a very kind of progressive scholar, and he wrote this book that argued that Jesus was never buried, but that he was left to hang on the cross and that he was eaten by dogs. When I read that in the 80s, I thought, this is crazy. In the 90s, oh my God, this guy's crazy. What in the world? Eaten by dogs? What is wrong with you?
Sounds great, yeah.
And so then some
Who would
years
think
later,
that?
Well, okay, so some years later, I wrote my book, How Jesus Became God, and I had to try to explain where the resurrection belief came from. And I think it did come from people thinking they'd seen Jesus, because I can explain why I think that, but I thought that. But I had to do with the question of the resurrection. I decided to look up every Greek and Roman reference I could find about crucifixion. It's interesting that we don't have any source that describes how they did it, how they crucified somebody. And so we all have these images, about being hanged up with their, nails through their hands or through their palms and nails to the feet. And like we have these images of what it's all like, but we don't have any literary descriptions of what they did, other than they're attaching them to wood and leaving them to die, attaching either with ropes or with nails. But then I tried to find what they said they did with the bodies afterwards. And there's a consistent theme that runs throughout Greek and Roman literature about how part of the punishment was to leave the bodies on the crosses, so that they would decompose on the cross and
to serve as a warning.
And would be subject to the scavengers. So especially birds, who would come and just pick the flesh when the person was dead, or maybe before they were dead. And so this is part of the punishment, because in the ancient world, if you don't get I mean, today everybody wants a decent burial, of course, but I mean, in the ancient world, if you didn't get a decent burial, it was awful, awful. This was like the worst thing you could imagine happening to you, not getting a decent burial. And so the Romans, as part of the, they wouldn't give him a decent burial. They just leave him on a cross for a week or so, and just 10 days, and then eventually they disposed of the remains somehow or other. They wanted the wood back or whatever. So I too doubt whether Jesus was given a decent burial, because Roman practice was not to do that. And my evangelical opponents on this say, yeah, but Joseph of Arimathea asked for the body. Okay.
Yeah, that's not how that works.
Stop the war in Ukraine. What? I didn't give a damn about something. What? He was as bad as Putin. I mean, he was awful. And the Romans, they didn't give a damn about this kind of stuff. What? I'm going to offend your piety? What the hell with your piety? This is what we do to people who say they're the king of the Jews. We don't let you bury them. So I don't think you got a decent burial.
One of my favorite apologists or apologetics about this is that Pilate wanted to avoid a riot. And I was like, no, we have a story of how Pontius Pilate handled a riot. There's a story where I forget the details at the moment, but he stole money from the temple in order to construct a ravine or something within the city. And the Jews revolted, and they all gathered, and he told them all to leave. And when they didn't, he had all of his soldiers dress up like them and carry clubs under their cloaks and go intermingle around them. And then when he told them to leave and they refused, he shut the gates and gave the order for his soldiers to start bashing as many people over the head as they could. That's how Pilate responded to the threat of a riot. If you thought he gave a shit about Roman or Jewish burial practices, you're wrong. And it's funny that, hold on. In Luke, especially, the author of Luke goes out of his way to make Pilate seem like this concerned guy, 3 separate times, I think. Pilate's like, are you sure?
Yeah.
You guys want me to crucify him? Are you? He doesn't seem like he did anything wrong. Really? You really want me to do this? And that's just not who Pilate was by every other record of his reign. He was the only governor, the only one who was impeached and exiled, right?
Well, the Romans got so fed up with him that they got rid of him because they thought he was too brutal, and he was massively brutal. I mean, he was, and so he, yeah.
And that's funny coming from the Roman Empire, because it's not like they were known for not being horrifically brutal in their own ways. It's interesting that we then get this narrative of Pontius Pilate saying almost I'm so sorry, Jesus, I don't really want to do this, but they said, because that doesn't track at all with what we do know about him.
It's interesting. You can actually line the Gospels up chronologically. So Mark is probably the first, then probably Matthew, then Luke, then John, and then you get later Gospels like the Gospel of Peter. But when you line them up chronologically and read how Pilate is treated, it's exactly what you're all saying, is that he gets more and more innocent over time. Pilate does. And so in the Gospel of Mark, if you just read the account of Jesus' trial, Pilate's a little confused, what wrong has he done? They say, crucify him. So he crucified him. When you get to Matthew, Pilate insists that Jesus hasn't done anything wrong, and they call out for him to be crucified. And Pilate calls for water, and he washes his hands, and he says, "His blood, I'm innocent of this man's blood." And the crowd cries out, "His blood be upon us and our children." These are the Jewish people crying out that they're going to take responsibility for Jesus' death and pass it on to their descendants. So that's Matthew. And you get to Luke, as you're saying, he 3 times declares Jesus innocent. And he sends him off to Herod to be judged, and Herod declares him innocent. And he ends up, and then when he gets crucified in Luke, at the end when he dies, unlike Mark, where you have the centurion by the side who sees him die in Mark, and the centurion says, "Truly this man was the Son of God." Doesn't say that in Luke. In Luke, the centurion sees him die and says, "This man was innocent." And so you got Pilate, the Roman governor. You got Herod, the king, and the Jewish king. You got the guy, the Roman guy representing the army. They're all declaring him innocent. You think, well, if Romans are innocent, who's guilty? It's those damn Jews.
Yeah. That reminds me that when I was given my first Bible by an evangelical friend in North Carolina, I heard what a lot of people hear, which was read John first. But then when I look at how much the story has changed, starting with Mark going all the way to John, when it comes to who is to blame for Jesus's death, I read John and I was kind of like, wait a minute, like, hold the phone. How much does this have to do with the thousands of years of anti-Semitism that followed at the hands of the church?
Yeah. No, well, it has a lot to do with it. I think so. Anti-Semitism is kind of a complicated issue because with my classes, I usually differentiate between anti-Semitism and anti-Judaism in a way most people haven't really thought of. But when we think of what happened throughout the Middle Ages and all the pogroms and all the horror and the persecution and the murders and things, Christians were persecuting Jews in order to get them to convert to Christianity. If they didn't convert, if they converted, they were still second-rate citizens, but at least they left them alone, pretty much. So why wasn't it that way during the Holocaust? Because in the Holocaust, if you were a Roman Catholic, and your parents and grandparents had been Roman Catholic, but you come from Jewish blood, you're still sent to the camps. And the reason is because of what happened in the 19th century with the development of race theories. We kind of have this idea that the race is like this thing that we know what it is and everybody agrees. And, the race theories are developed in the 19th century. And the idea was that your race is determined by birth. So it's what your blood is. And so if your grandparents are Jews, I'm sorry, I don't care if you call yourself a Roman Catholic, you're a Jew. You've got Jewish blood in you. And so it doesn't matter if you worship Christ, you're going to the camps. And so what I call anti-Semitism is that modern phenomenon, Semitism, anti-Semitism against people who are Jews just because of their birth. Anti-Judaism, though, is the forerunner of anti-Semitism. And anti-Judaism appears to come in with Christianity. People don't realize this, but in the Roman world broadly, Jews weren't any more persecuted than the Ethiopians or the whoever. I mean, whoever was a minority group is, in the sense that people made fun of them. But Jews were never singled out in particular until the Christians came along. And the Christians said, look, you've rejected your own God. And since you've rejected God, God has rejected you, and God's going to punish you. And since we're on the side of God, we're going to punish you. So that ends up leading to all the pogroms and things that it ends up leading
to. Cray asks a good question leading up to that. How much anti-Semitism in Paul's epistles were forgeries, and how much was authentic? I might also add, like, how much do you think Paul's rhetoric contributed to anti-Semitism in the first century?
Well, I don't think there was any anti-Semitism then. I don't think you had that till the 19th century, but you certainly have anti-Judaism. Paul's a tricky case because Paul considered himself a Jew to the day he died, and he was not opposed to Jews and Judaism. Paul was opposed to people who didn't believe that Jesus was the Messiah, but he continued to think that he was Jewish, and he thought that his message was actually from the Jewish God in fulfillment of the Jewish scriptures. So he was really opposed to those who were opposed to Christ rather than opposed to Jews. But some of the things he says could certainly be used for anti-Jewish purposes, and they were used for anti-Jewish purposes. So I think that this is true. I think some of the biggest problems are actually in Galatians and Romans, which are authentically Pauline. They're not forgeries. They're books that Paul almost certainly wrote himself. And there's where you get some passages that sure sound going, oh boy. Like, he talks about how in Galatians, he says that Jews and Christians have all descended from Abraham, but Abraham had children with his wife Sarah, but also with Sarah's slave Hagar, and because Sarah couldn't get pregnant, and you know, well, maybe God says you're going to have a child through, maybe it's going to be through someone else related to me. So he goes off and has sex with Hagar, and they have a child, Ishmael, which beginning of, and so the Ishmaelites and stuff. So Paul says, so Sarah, so he has a child by the promise, which is the one that was promised to Sarah, and then the child of slavery, Hagar. And he indicates that Jews are the ones who are the children of slavery, and Christians are the ones who are children of the promise. And so that sure sounds anti-Jewish, but if you dig deep into it, it's not quite clear, because he thinks that these children of Sarah are Jews. I mean, it's not that they're, and so it's a little more complicated with Paul. But what happens is people don't like complication when they think about things like that. They're not interested in nuance. It's just,
Yep.
it's them and us.
It's funny. I've been researching the origins of Islam and the Prophet Muhammad recently, or more recently. But it's funny how similar the two stories are between Paul and Muhammad, because they both sought the approval of the Jews, and they were both rejected by the Jews. And afterwards, they both started to criticize and maybe even demonize the Jews or Judaism. And they led their followers to do the same.
Not the Muhammad, so I don't know enough to say about it.
I don't know either. I'm just reading. I'm just regurgitating things that I've been reading.
Yeah. It's a hard thing when you're reading about something, like a new topic in religion, especially. I always go into it with with fear and trepidation when I'm reading about something new, because you never know what you're reading and who, and so you've got to be really careful, because especially these days, oh my God, you just get the most amazing nonsense from the internet. And so, oh my God,
articulate nonsense.
Yeah, articulate. Yeah, if you're articulate, you must be right. Okay.
Yeah, and I mean, not even just concerning religion, but just in general.
No,
I feel like people tend to form opinions before they know enough about something to form an opinion. It's just sort of, we want to read a headline and then just give a thumbs up or thumbs down and call it a day. But within religion in general, but even small religions, there is so much history, there is so much context and nuance that is to be had there. I don't think that it's something that you can just sort of, skim through and call it a day.
Well, I think we all do it because we just, I mean, how much can you learn about the history of Ukraine? I mean, it's like, or how much about Russia? I mean, it's like, or the history of the liberal democracy. I mean, we think it's like it's been around forever. No, it's been around since the Enlightenment, and it might be just a blip on the screen the way things are going. But things that we just take and so people have their opinions because we're raised thinking certain things, and if something goes against them, we think, well, that can't be right.
Yeah.
I had a question a while ago. I don't know if you saw this that I was going to respond to, but we got into something else. Asking me about whether the story about Barabbas in the Gospels.
Yeah, I had that up, and it went away.
Yes, I have it right here. Thought on Barabbas being set free. Would the Romans have allowed that?
Yeah, so that's a really good one. So I think the answer is no. And so, but it's a very interesting story, because what happens is in the Gospel of Mark, Pilate wants to let Jesus go. He doesn't think he's done anything wrong, but Mark says that Pilate has a custom that at Passover he always releases one prisoner to the Jews, so that they can, in order to, because it's Passover, he's kind of giving them this gift. And he's got two people. He's got Jesus here, and he's got Barabbas, who was in prison because of a murder during an insurrection. So Barabbas in the story is an insurrectionist against Rome who's committed murder, which almost certainly means a Roman soldier. So Pilate is offering to release an insurrectionist who has murdered a Roman soldier. Okay. So as we were saying earlier, I mean, Pilate Pilate was not a nice guy.
Oh, he was a dick.
We don't have any records, of course, of Pilate having a custom of releasing insurrectionists to the crowd so they can go out and murder another soldier. And we don't have records of him ever releasing anybody. We don't have a record of any governor anywhere in the Roman Empire doing something like this. This is not, so probably not. But what's the story all about then? And you have to look kind of deeply into the story and think about it for a minute, because Pilate is giving the Jewish people a choice between somebody who wants to sponsor a fruitless political military coup against the Romans, or someone who has come to die for the sins of the world. In Mark's understanding, right? So do you want this person who's going to get you all killed, or do you want the one who's going to save your souls? Not your souls, but the ones who's going to save you. And the Jewish people choose the insurrectionist. We want the insurrectionist. And of course, Mark is probably being written soon after the war against Rome, when insurrectionists finally created an uprising that led to a 3.5-year war and the siege of Jerusalem and massive starvation inside the walls. And then they destroyed Jerusalem. They ran out of lumber. They crucified so many people after this. And then the temple got burned and destroyed. It's never been rebuilt. So that's who the Jewish people prefer to their Messiah. And so that the story is about that. That's what it's about. It's not something that happened. It couldn't have, I don't see how it could have happened. But the other interesting thing, two other interesting things. One is that the name Barabbas in Aramaic means son of the Father. And so you have two people claiming to be the Son of God, the insurrectionist and the Messiah. And so they choose the insurrectionist. But the other thing is that in Matthew, you have some manuscripts, and this may be what Matthew actually wrote, where Barabbas's first name is Jesus. So you got a choice here. What Jesus
Really?
do you want? Yeah.
I think I remember hearing about this, but
yeah. So anyway, no, I don't think it's historical. I don't see how it can be historical, but I think it's there in order to make some point again about kind of condemning Jews for what they did.
I had another question. Dr. Ehrman, do you think the author of Acts used Josephus as a source? Steve Mason convinced him.
I'm
familiar with this book.
Pardon me? Yeah.
So I'm familiar with it. I can't remember if he's the author of the book I read. That makes all those connections between Acts and like.
Yeah, he's a scholar of ancient Judaism. Very, very smart scholar. Knows he's an expert on Josephus, big Josephus scholar. And there's been a movement for maybe 20 years now to think that that the book of Acts has gotten some of its stories from Josephus's Antiquities of the Jews. And the reason that matters is because Josephus wrote the Antiquities of the Jews in the early 90s, so 90 to 93. Luke and Acts are usually dated to the 80s. And so, but if Luke used Josephus, then he's, and so there's been this, people get on my case for dating everything late, even though I basically accept the dates that most historical scholars accept. But a lot of historical scholars now are dating the book of Acts to the year 120.
Wow.
120.
Wait, 120, really?
120, yeah.
Wow, I did not know that.
Yeah,
I didn't either.
It's becoming I mean, I don't know if it's a majority view yet, but a lot of scholars are getting onto this bandwagon. And I haven't jumped on the bandwagon yet. I haven't been convinced, but I'm open to be convinced. I don't think it's implausible, but I haven't seen evidence that convinces me yet. But I haven't studied it at great depth. And so I'm not a particular expert in order to evaluate, but the links between Josephus and Luke that I've seen have not been overly compelling to me. My sense today is that a lot of people, so it's a big issue in early Christianity when you've got similar stories about something, figuring out who borrowed from whom. This has been a thing going for a long time, because if you can figure out who borrowed from whom, that shows you who was later and who was earlier. So that's why it matters whether Mark was the source for Matthew instead of the other way around, because it affects their dates. And so usually these days, though, a lot of scholars are kind of lowering the standard of proof, the burden of proof. So you don't need as much evidence. It's just like they tell similar things. You've got these similar words, and it's kind of similar. And so you think, oh, then this must have been the source for that. And so I don't. It takes a little bit more. I have a higher burden of proof as a rule, and so I just haven't been convinced. But I'm completely open to it.
How do you feel about the claims of Acts using like the Iliad and the Odyssey as a source? Like Paul has all these like shipwrecks that are parallel a lot of the stories in the Iliad and the Odyssey and the works of Homer.
Yeah.
But like Paul had like the Sea of Galilee around his ministry. Like he lived in a landlocked area otherwise. Like how likely is it he kept going on all these sea voyages and getting shipwrecked all the time?
So the scholars promoted this the most is Dennis MacDonald, who teaches for a long time. He's taught the Irish School of Theology, and he's a Harvard PhD, and he's a really, really smart guy, knows a lot, and he's a really good guy. And so he's written these books about how various New Testament authors, including, for example, Mark, are writing. Mark's writing the gospel, kind of riffing on Homer's Iliad and Odyssey. And so it's a clever argument, and he marshals his argument for it. I just have never been convinced at all. The idea of shipwreck stories, for example, they're very, very common in Greek and Roman literature. And so it's not, and so it's, and a lot of these motifs are just motifs that you find throughout Greek and Roman literature. And so I don't see it. And I'm a big fan of the Iliad and the Odyssey. I mean, just 5 mornings of the week, I get up at 6:30 to read the Odyssey in Greek for an hour. I love these books. I mean, it's like, oh my God, fantastic.
Wow.
But I don't see it.
I didn't know that. That's a fantastic morning ritual.
Oh, it's the best time of my day. Like
that's a horrifying morning ritual.
Trying to figure out these complicated grammatical. Because I wasn't, I've read Greek for many, many years, but the Greek I read is a different kind of Greek from the Greek of Homer, and so I had to retool myself to read Homeric Greek, and So I'm not a classicist who can read this stuff like the newspaper, but it sure is fun.
I was gonna say, I can just imagine you right now if I'm there filling out the New York Times crossword puzzle early in the morning, feeling pretty good about myself, and you're right there reading the Odyssey in Greek. I just, got to take it down a notch.
For probably over 30 years, I've always gotten up early in the morning to study languages, and usually ancient languages. But so I taught myself Coptic that way, and Latin and Syriac, and just it's just I don't know why. It's because I'm no good in languages. That's why I'm no good in language. So like I've got to study hard because like I'm not gifted like some people I know can just figure this stuff out. I can't. So, but it's I think it's good training for the brain. Actually, but I'll tell you this, Genevieve, I have never in my life been able to complete a crossword puzzle of any kind.
I have a hard time believing that. Maybe if you pull a Greek newspaper, you might have an easier time.
I'm a wordsmith. I write all the time, and I cannot do crossword puzzles. It's a weird thing.
Interesting.
I
couldn't imagine.
Yeah, I'm learning so many things right now about you that I never thought I would, and I'm just delighted. I'm giddy. I did see
if someone woke me up. Oh, go ahead. If someone woke me up at 6 a.m. and told me to read the Iliad in Greek, I would miss basic training. Like,
come on.
You want me to what now?
Yeah, no, it's like
I wish I had that kind of discipline. I really do.
Scholars are strange beings.
I did see a really interesting question in the chat, which I
There's
have
a
some
few we
thoughts about.
missed.
Yeah, there's a lot of really good questions here.
Oh,
I'm looking at this.
sorry, you guys, if we missed your
Yeah.
question. It's just
We're trying. It's easy to get caught up. Which one were you looking at, Ricky? Because I'm looking at this question by Atheist Chico.
yeah, that was one of them. There it is.
Yeah. Yeah. Was Jesus just an educated guy who thought the theocracy is bad, but I'm powerless to do much of anything, so I'll grift / make Judaism more humanistic? Do you think Jesus was convinced he was God? I have my thoughts, but let's hear yours.
Yeah, same.
Could you leave the question up, because there were a couple of things.
Yeah.
A couple of things.
Oh God, it's gone now. Hold on, I'll find it.
Well, I'll answer. So
there it is.
No. Okay. So to begin with, I don't think Jesus was educated. He almost certainly didn't have an education. In terms of going to a school, he grew up in Nazareth, which archaeologists have dug up, and there were no public buildings there at the time. It was a small hamlet, might have had 300-400 people in it, and since they're big families, how many families? I don't know. 40 families maybe, and so there may have been literate people there, but maybe Jesus learned to read on the side, but he wasn't highly educated at all. Nothing indicates that he could write, for example, that he could compose writings. I also don't think that he thought theocracy was bad. I think he was advocating there's going to be a theocracy. When he talks about the kingdom of God, he means a real kingdom, I think, and that God is ultimately going to rule the kingdom through his Messiah. The trick was, I think Jesus thought he was the Messiah. He was going to be the king that God ruled through. So as opposed to being opposed to theocracy, he thought he was going to rule the theocracy, I think. And I don't think he thought he was God. I don't. So I recently did a course. I've started doing these courses that Rick, about like this resurrection thing's going to be a course. But my first one I did was on, did Jesus think he was God? And gave a lecture on it with some Q&A, and I argued that no, I don't think Jesus thought he was God at all, at all. And so, later Christians said that that over time, as we were saying earlier, over time the views start changing about everything in the Gospels until you get to the Gospel of John, where Jesus does call himself a divine being, absolutely, and the Jews take up stones to stone him to death for it. And after a while, when you get to the Council of Nicaea, he's not just like any old God. He is equal with God the Father from eternity past. I mean, he is literally equal with God Almighty. And whoa, that is not all what Jesus thought.
Yeah, drawing from Philippians 2.
Funny question offshooting from that is, if, from what you understand the historical Jesus to be, what do you think his reaction would be walking into an average American church today, seeing the cross and hearing the sermons?
Yeah, that.
How familiar would it be?
Oh no, it wouldn't be familiar. He would be flabbergasted, and he would consider it a complete blasphemy, I'm sure.
Yeah, and the classic, what part of my story makes you think that I would enjoy the cross everywhere?
Yeah, well, that too. I mean, I see. Just think about, like you have a waterboarding table that you worship or something.
Yeah, it's bizarre. An electric chair around your neck.
Electric chair around your neck, yeah.
I used to wear one around my neck all the time for years and years and years, never even realizing, hey, this is dumb.
Well, I had one for years and years. I continued.
I have a tattoo.
What is it?
It's a cross.
Ah, there you go. Yeah.
And
yeah.
I lacked the funds to get it covered up.
A crucifix that my Episcopal priest gave me that I wore proudly for years and years and years. When I left Christianity, I continued to wear it, but I took the cross off as a statement.
Yeah. That's a fair compromise.
Yeah.
I replaced mine. I have a Mjolnir because my family comes from Scandinavia. And when I took off my cross, I felt naked because I wore a necklace all the time for several years. And I was like, I need to replace it with something, but I don't know what. So
yeah, I got it.
That's what I went with. Anyway, another question. What evidence do you two believe the disciples' belief in the resurrection was based on? Correa, what are you trying to say right now?
I got it. No, I got it.
Yeah.
I got it. what evidence shows that the disciples believed in the resurrection because they had visions? And I think my view is that all the evidence points in that direction. The evidence might be wrong, but the evidence, that's what all the evidence says, I think. So that what Christian apologists will argue is that there were several things that made them believe: the empty tomb, the two things: the empty tomb and the visions. But they won't call them visions; the appearances of Jesus. But if you look closely, even at the Gospels, in the Gospels, the empty tomb never convinces somebody Jesus has been raised from the dead. And it just takes a moment of reflection to realize why. You bury somebody, you put them in a tomb, and 3 days later you go back and the tomb is empty. Is your first thought, oh, he's ascended to heaven? No. Oh my God, somebody's robbed the grave. Or, I'm at the wrong tomb. I mean, you don't say, oh, he's ascended to heaven because see the tomb's no. I mean, and so every time somebody sees a tomb, they can't figure out what in the world's going on. Why is the tomb empty? So what brings faith in the Gospels is people seeing Jesus. And it's worth noting that Paul, our first witness to the resurrection, doesn't mention the empty tomb. He mentions the appearances of Jesus. And so I think there's got to be something behind that. I mean, something made people believe because they didn't believe at one point, then they did believe, and something made them believe. And I think my view is that people did have. So I mentioned earlier, I'm pretty sure that Peter had some kind of visionary experience, whether it was just, those of us who aren't Christian just think he just was seeing things, or he thought he saw something. Mary, something similar. Maybe they confirmed each other's reports, but eventually Paul, 3 years later, also. And I don't think that all the disciples had visions, and I don't think there was necessarily a group. I don't think 500 people once saw him the way Paul says they did, but I think at least those three did. And of course, it's Peter, Paul, and Mary. So what better witnesses can you get than Peter, Paul, and Mary? So so they break out in song and start singing "Kumbaya" or something. So I think it's all based on visionary experiences.
And finally, I think Paul, converting was a huge win, because they're like, here's someone who can read and write in probably more than one language, who was an authority in the early church who persecuted. This was a huge win for him to have this conversion experience or this vision.
Yeah. No, I mean, something changed his mind, and I don't think it was just he says it was a vision. And I really don't see any reason to. The thing is, people think, oh, come on, that's nobody has really. But I spent a long time actually studying the psychology of visions, and it's really, really interesting because psychologists know a lot about visions, and there's a lot written about visions, and and they're extremely well documented. I mean, for one thing, 1 out of 8 of us will have a vision of a deceased loved one in our life, where we're really convinced this person's come back to let us know they're doing fine. Usually that's what the scenario. So you'll see your grandmother in your bedroom 3 weeks after she's been buried or something. Like 1 out of 8 people have that. And so the 2 most common visions actually are deceased loved ones and beloved religious leaders. The Blessed Virgin Mary showing up all the time.
Mary, yeah.
It is well documented. I mean, groups of people seeing the Blessed Virgin, doctors and lawyers and stuff. I mean, it's seriously documented. And
the miracle of the sun.
No, they're not maybe making it up. Maybe they're seeing something and they're just, they're inclined to think, oh my God, that was Mary. So there's no problem with groups of people seeing Jesus. Groups of people see things all the time that aren't there.
There's also a social dynamic where if everyone around you is claiming to have seen a vision and you don't want to be the one that says, guys, I don't see anything, you're going to be left out. So you're going to, I saw it too, you guys. I totally saw it. Did you? Yeah, it was amazing.
I too spoke in tongues. Yeah, I did, really.
Yeah. We got a question from Jagazus. Do you think this pseudepigraphical work in the Near East were common? Cough, cough, Paul. Pseudepigraphal.
Yes.
So I've actually written, pseudepigraphal. So that means book. Pseudepigrapha.
He spelled it wrong. I read it wrong.
Scholars tend to use the term pseudepigrapha for what's in the New Testament rather than forgeries, which is the word we normally would use. And scholars prefer to use that for a couple of reasons. One is that it seems less offensive. Three reasons. One, it seems less offensive. The second is because they thought that in the ancient world there were good reasons for writing pseudepigraphy. And the third reason is because they know nobody will know what the word means, and so it doesn't sound offensive. Pseudepigraphy literally means a writing that is based on a lie. And so they don't tell their people that. So the question is, are there forgeries? By forgery, I use the term forgery in a very technical sense, which is it's a book that is written that is the author claims to be someone famous that he's not. So he's not that person, but he claims to be that person. And it's a famous, somebody will know. And so I've actually written 2 books on this. One called Forged for a general audience. And if anybody wants to get into the weeds, I've written a big over 600-page book called Forgery and Counterforgery, where I discuss masses of instances throughout the Roman Empire and the Middle East and stuff.
Yeah, that one gets into it. Oof.
It's in the weeds, but the answer is yes. It was very common, and it happened a lot. People in the ancient world recognized that forgery was happening, but they didn't really have as good of means of uncovering it as we have. So we can use all sorts of data analysis to figure out, yeah, this claims to be a book by Mark Twain or whatever, but it's not, because we can analyze everything. Where the Hitler diaries, that's probably before your old time, but the Hitler diaries came out in the 80s, where somebody had forged diaries written by Adolf Hitler during the Second World War. And it was headline news because it fooled the experts for days and days until they found out who did it. And whoops, he's very good at what he did. And but the ancient world, they didn't have the kinds of systems we have to figure it out. And so it was more common then. And so, but a lot of scholars claim that it was accepted then on the basis of a number of arguments. One is that since it was practiced so much, it was obviously acceptable. Right. Like adultery, for example. Everybody does it, so it must be socially acceptable, right? Yeah, well, no, not exactly.
Not how things work.
So, just because something happens a lot, what? And so, but then they also argue more sophisticated things, luckily, such as that it was that people saw through it, and so it was accepted because everybody knew, it was just a game of some kind, which is wrong. And more sophisticated, they will say things like, in the philosophical schools, it was thought that it was okay for a student to write a treatise in the name of his master because he got his ideas from the master and he doesn't want to brag about his own. So he doesn't sign his name. He signs his master's teacher's name because the teacher's the one who came up with these ideas, and it's just an act of humility. This all sounds really persuasive when somebody tells you this, and I learned this. Everybody in graduate school, everybody still learns this in graduate school, and it's completely wrong. It's just wrong. And so I spent years reading everything I could on forgery, and reading the ancient sources, reading every ancient source I could find that mentions this phenomenon of forgery, and it is not acceptable practice. They called it lying. They considered it a form of lying.
Yeah.
So they didn't speak English, so they didn't use the word forgery, obviously, but they had other words that were not nice. The 2 common words for forgery in Greek were lies, pseuda or pseudoi, and bastards, with that kind of negative connotation intentionally there. So not just illegitimate children, but bastards. And so because you don't know who the father is, and so you just trash this writing, and you trash it. The word is no. These are no. And so so they didn't treat it very kindly, and it was very common. And there in the New Testament, there are 13 letters that claim to be written by Paul. 7 of them scholars think Paul probably wrote, but 6 of them are widely considered pseudepigraphic by historic scholars, or forged. But that's not all. I mean, First and Second Peter, almost certainly forged. James, Jude, forged. So there are a lot of books that go under the wrong name but aren't forged because the author doesn't claim to be this person. So whoever wrote Matthew, Mark, and Luke and John were almost certainly not Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, but they don't claim to be Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. So somebody else said they were Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and John, but it's not the author's fault. So forgery has to do with what the author is claiming to be somebody he's not.
Yeah, I will also say for the record. No, go ahead. Oh, I was just gonna.
No, you go ahead. God damn it.
Oh, stop. So Forged was the most recent book of yours that I read, and I have to highly recommend it to everybody who's watching it here because it is so fascinating, and I could not stop giggling sort of at how funny it is that there is this euphemism because you're exactly right. It's a forgery. Like you can call it pseudepigraphical if you want to, and it sounds it's a beautiful word to say. It's almost like
and you sound very sophisticated when you say that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. But then also, what you explained again tonight,
right.
which that's okay. I don't blame him for that. It's a doozy, but it's interesting how there was sort of this long-standing myth that especially among Christian scholars that, well, yes, but it was fine. It was totally different back then, and it was.
They still say that. Everyone says it, and it's just completely wrong.
Yeah. That's
they also come up, this other thing that everybody says, I get this all the time, is that, well, so probably what happened is like with Matthew, Mark, and Luke, okay, they're not, but they really were written by Matthew. Matthew dictated it to a secretary. And so the secretary wrote it down. So it's because of secretaries. So in my book, I showed that's not right either. That just didn't happen so far as we know. Where that like First Peter was really written by Peter. Yeah, but Peter didn't speak Greek. Well, okay, so he dictated it in Aramaic and a scribe put it into Greek. And so my book, I try to show that's not right either. It just doesn't work.
Yeah. And if you try to like back translate these writings into Aramaic, it doesn't work.
Well, no, that's a really good point. So no, it does not work, especially with First Peter, which is a fairly sophisticated Greek. And he didn't know sophisticated Aramaic to begin with. But it's right, you can't back translate. So the only way to get to it then is to say that Peter said, okay, like write this letter, and like I wanted to tell him this, this, and that, and kind of generalized. And then some really highly educated Greek scribe came along and like created the letter for him. But if that were the case in the ancient world, they would have called that forged, because Peter didn't write it. This guy did.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Ever doing that? Nobody, no record of anybody ever doing that. Here, write a letter like this. Okay, make it 5 chapters. I don't know. It doesn't happen. Sorry.
Eddie. Fuck, what was I gonna say? Yeah, it's interesting. I learned Greek in college. I've forgotten most of it now, so don't ask me to demonstrate. It's a very perishable skill that I did not stay on top of. But it's interesting.
Work on it.
Yeah.
Was that? Yeah, I'm gonna have to take a pass on that. I've got. When I wake up at 6 to get my kids ready for school. That's how I spend my mornings. Maybe when they go off to college, I'll be able to be a more disciplined and efficient human being.
I get to that age. I got up at 4 to do it.
Oh God!
Wow.
Seriously.
Keep putting me to shame.
Come on, Ricky. What are you doing?
Fucking nothing, apparently. You got up early enough for far too long being in the military. I give you a pass to sleep in anytime you want to for your service. I appreciate that. Yeah, I appreciate that. If I was allowed to go to sleep at all.
Yeah.
But it's funny learning that like the author of Revelation was terrible. Not terrible, but they were not as good at Greek as some of the other authors. That's something you learn. It's like, what? Like you'd think like with the language that's being used and the imagery that's being used in the book, and we're going full circle. We're going back to Revelation now. Didn't plan that. You'd think he would know Greek very, very well to be able to write that kind of stuff, but that's not how it works.
No.
It didn't seem to be his first language.
I'll be dealing this with a little bit in my book on Revelation, but he is he's not a good writer, and he makes flat out grammatical mistakes, and scholars have tried to explain that away too, And I used to explain it the standard way. What everybody says is that, what most people say is that the reason he doesn't write Greek very well is because John was from Israel and his language is Aramaic. And so Greek is his second language. And so, you don't write as well if you're, like my trying to speak German or something, it doesn't work too well. So that's the reason. But it turns out there's no reason really to think that he's a linguist has looked at this problem and argued. In fact, there's nothing to suggest his primary language was Semitic. People come up with all sorts of theories. My theory is the guy couldn't write very well. So what? He could still write better than 99% of the rest of the population. It's just, he wasn't one of the literary elite, but he's not good in Greek. Last time I taught a course, I taught an undergraduate course with classics students at UNC. I'm in an adjunct in the classics department. So I was teaching this class on Greek. And I gave them an assignment. I gave them Revelation chapters 1 and 2, and their assignment was to identify all the grammatical mistakes.
Well, as you kind of pointed out, when you're looking at the time, you're just grading against a curve for the population, and it's brilliant.
Yeah.
Nobody could write in general.
Yeah. But the people who could write, the literati in the Roman world, made fun of the early Christian writings for being so subpar in terms of style. And these are not like really, top 0.1%. They're but they can write. And so they're more highly educated than most Christians by a long shot.
And there's a big difference between being literate and being a scribe. Like you talk about all the time, like all of our manuscripts prior to the 4th century were written by people who were just literate for the most part. Yeah. And you don't really find manuscripts written by actual scribes until after that. And prior to that, a lot of these manuscripts were copied by slaves, even just like the guy who could kind of read and write in your local church. Like these were not trained. These people were not trained to do this. So they made mistakes a lot.
I mean, slaves are an interesting case because, there were slaves who were trained to be scribes because that was, they needed scribes in the house. But these Christian texts, they don't appear to be written by people who are, I had a PhD student years ago who's now a full professor at Cornell. She's an Ivy League professor who wrote her dissertation on this question about doing a social history of Christian scribes in the 2nd and 3rd centuries. She wanted to know, what kind of socioeconomic class did they come from? What kind of education did they have? What were they trained to do? Were there any women who were scribes? Very interesting kinds of stuff. And so there's actually ways to figure this sort of thing out. But it's not until later. People. Here's a strange phenomenon that most people don't know. In the Greek and Roman world, you had to have lots of scribes because most people couldn't write. And so, like if you buy if you need a land deed, right? You've purchased some land, you need to have you need a receipt. You can't write a receipt, so there's a guy that you go to who does who writes these things out. So it turns out some of these scribes that we know about from Egypt could not write, didn't know what they were writing. The way we know that is that we have some interesting evidence. We have this papyrus where this guy is practicing signing his name. He's a scribe. He's practicing signing his name because his job is to sign off on things. And he signs his name a few times, and then he accidentally misspells his name once, and after that he continually misspells it the same way.
Oh no!
He's drawing the letters based on what he sees. He doesn't know what he's writing.
Wow,
he's described.
Fascinating.
Was it P666?
Well, P66 is not a good man. Well, that scribe made a lot of errors. I mean, he was a copyist, but he made hundreds of mistakes.
I said 666. I was making a joke, but yeah.
No. Well, okay. But there was a P66, in fact, with a very bad scribe, so you did well.
Yeah, P66 is a thing, and it's a very fun thing. What is your drinking, by the way? I have to ask.
Well, I was just
thinking before I go on,
people get upset when I drink wine on the podcast, but I always think, at least I'm not Christopher Hitchens. He drank vodka.
Oh. I drink straight rum. Well, no, this is I have a beer tonight.
Okay, well, that's fine. No, when it hits 7 o'clock, I don't care what I'm doing. I'm drinking a glass of wine.
Yeah.
What-
I just finished my
There it is.
coconut water, but before I did have a glass of brandy.
a glass of what?
Brandy.
The coconut water to follow.
Yeah.
You got it turned around there.
It's all about balance. It's all about balance.
That reminds me, I had a lieutenant in the military when we would all go out and have a smoke break. He would come out and literally just step into the circle of us and start eating an apple. Like, we're all smoking cigarettes and he's eating an apple. We're like, really, sir? Are you trying to make us feel bad? What are you doing right now?
Huh. What was he doing? Was he trying to make you feel bad?
No, he was just trying to, he just wanted to be a part of the group, like a part of the conversation.
Okay.
He wasn't one of those, like, I'm an officer, you're like, he wanted to be one of the guys. But he didn't smoke. So instead he ate an apple while we all smoked.
Okay.
Anyway, so we've only got a few minutes left. Jen, you have any last thoughts or questions?
Oh my gosh. Well, I wish I did. Bart, I had no idea I was coming on the show until an hour before we went live. So
Yeah. My usual co-host is a professional geoarchaeologist. Her name's Natty Nat, and she's brilliant and amazing. And she texted me like an hour or so before the show and was like, "Hey, I'm not feeling well. I'm sorry. I'm not gonna be able to make it." I was like, "It's all good." And I reached out to Jen and I was like, "Hey, would you be available for this?" And she was like, "Yeah." It's like awesome, because I was super nervous about. I was like, I'm gonna have to entertain Dr. Bart fucking Ehrman for 2 hours, and all by myself.
And I'm not say all that. I say all that because had I known, I feel like I would have had a laundry list of questions for you. I mean, this is such a fantastic opportunity. Thanks for being here. The only question I can think of off the top of my head right now is, of all of the books that you have written, which one is your favorite? Which is the favorite child?
Right. Yeah, it's kind of complicated. So when you that one, I mean, the thing is, what tends to happen when you write a book is that whatever you've just finished writing is the best book you've ever written. So so the thing is, I've got, among my books, I've got different kinds of favorites, but I mean, I definitely have favorites, but different kinds of favorites. And so I write 3 kinds of books. I write the general books for a general audience, but that was never what I wanted to do with my life at all. I had no interest in doing that. Second kind of book I write are textbooks for undergraduate students. And so I have a textbook on the New Testament, 2 textbooks on the New Testament. I've got some readers. I've got a book on the entire Bible. So I write textbooks. But then I write scholarly books. And so my best, in terms of the general books that people might be interested in, my best-selling book by far is Misquoting Jesus.
I believe that was the first one that I read. It is. Well,
green screen's kind of covering it up.
There are all sorts of weird stories. I can easily fill out your minutes here. So it was a weird book because the book is about what we were just saying, how scribes changed their manuscripts. And this is the area of biblical studies that has been around the longest since there started being like serious study of the Bible. It goes way back to as soon as they invented printing, they started realizing that if they wanted to print a Bible, they had to choose which manuscript. And so they started noticing, wait, these manuscripts are different. Which one do I print? And then they find more and say, wait, all these are different. And they end up finding thousands of them. They're all different. And it's like, oh my God. And what do we do? And so this idea that you study the manuscripts to figure out what the author originally wrote, given the fact that all the manuscripts have different, the differences are mainly insignificant. They don't matter for anything, but you've got to print something, right? You're printing a word. Which word do I print? And so you got to choose. So this thing has been around since the early 16th century, and there was never a book written for a general audience to explain it. And the reason is because it is so damn complicated. I spent my master's degree and my PhD studying this field intensely. My first 3 books were in this field, highly technical books that nobody's going to want to read, but about this thing. And it occurred to me, it's, nobody knows about the situation with the manuscripts. And so I told my friend, my academic friends, I said, yeah, I'm thinking about writing a book on, the Greek manuscript. They said, are you crazy? I said, no, I think I can make it interesting. You're not going to make it interesting. Most scholars want nothing to do with this field. Most New Testament scholars don't know about this field. They don't know because they think it's arcane and technical, and it's like, God, who cares? And so I had to figure out a way to make it sound like it would be interesting. So I wrote this book, and so it's the biggest surprise ever that people wanted to hear about this stuff, and so, because I had to explain it in a way that made it interesting, and I tried to do that. So it is by far my best-selling book. So it's my favorite for that reason, but I don't think it's my best. I don't think it's my best book. I mean, I think my most important book, and I've got 2 books I think are the most important books. I think Heaven and Hell is a really important book because it tries to show why early Christians did not believe what every Christian today appears to believe, that when you die, your soul goes to heaven or hell. People are scared to death that they're going to go to hell. And they're just like spending all their time trying to get to heaven. And they really think when you die, that's what happens. And then in this book, I try to show heaven and hell are not taught in the Old Testament anywhere, and they're not what Jesus believed. So why are they the standard Christian view? And so that's interesting. And I think it's pretty important. But the book I think maybe I think the best book I've written, the best general book, is How Jesus Became God.
Mm-hmm.
That was a really good one.
That was a really good one.
But I think that the best book I've written that nobody's ever read is a book called Jesus Before the Gospels.
I've read that one. That's a good one.
I think you're the one. Oh, okay.
I'm the one.
So
I have that one.
I'll put it on my list.
Oh no, because it's about, everybody says that the Gospels are written later, but they're based on oral traditions. And in oral cultures, everybody kept their traditions faithfully because they didn't have writing to rely on. And so they recorded their things faithfully. And if you've got eyewitness reports, you can trust eyewitnesses. They're eyewitnesses. And so I spent 2 years reading nothing about the Gospels, about Jesus, about the New Testament. 2 years reading just studies of memory. And what psychologists know about memory and what anthropologists know about oral cultures from actually studying them instead of guessing about them. Oh my God, does that affect the Gospels? And so this book is all about, the problem that these Gospels are based on oral traditions that are problematic. So I will say among my scholarly books, my favorite, my most important book that in the field has been Orthodox Corruption of Scripture, which is about manuscripts, how about scribes change their manuscripts.
Another good one. I got that one too.
It's a real, but my most serious, best book is this book on forgery and counter forgery, and it's the most serious thing I've ever tried to write. But my favorite book is the one that's coming out in April. My favorite scholarly book. It's stories of early Christian tales about visiting heaven and hell. Actual guided tours of heaven and hell. But it's a scholarly
book of Enoch.
It's a hard-hitting scholar. Yeah, it's like Enoch. I talk about Enoch, and so yeah.
Yeah,
I love that.
Yeah, a few others. What is really interesting, one of the first things when you go to Bible college, I don't know if you had this experience. I went into Bible college like cocksure. Like I knew the Bible very well. I was on fire for God. Like I had elders in my church who were like, you know the Bible better than anybody else besides the pastor. You need to go into ministry. So I went into Bible college like very confident. And one of the first things they told us was forget everything you ever heard about the Bible in church. It's probably wrong. And what's interesting about getting a bachelor's degree is I got that degree having more questions than I did before I started the program. Like I had all of the answers before I went to Bible college, and then after I got my degree, I was like, "There's so much more." Which is why, like, I get criticized a lot by other Christian apologists. Like, why are you still reading the Bible? Here's my Bible. Like,
yeah, right.
Like, why are you still reading it? It's like, because I'm still fascinated by it because I believed X, Y, and Z about it, and now I'm learning that a lot of that's not true. And what I appreciate about your work so much, Dr. Ehrman, is that a lot of your work answers those questions that I had after getting my degree.
Interesting. Yeah.
So your work like fills in the gaps for me, and that's why
I'm glad.
I consume so much of it. So I really appreciate it.
Well, I will say, when I went to Moody Bible Institute, that was not my experience. When I went to Moody Bible Institute, my first experience was we had to take an entrance exam and check our biblical knowledge. Oh my God, did I bomb that one? Here's one of the questions. Here's one of the questions. To see if any of your listeners can get this one right.
Here we go. I'm ready.
This is the entrance exam. I was 17. Here's a question. Who was the only left-handed judge?
Yep, I failed. I'm not allowed to attend.
Oh no!
My application has been rejected.
I know. That's why oh my God. And so the answer is Ehud. So there's a great story in Judges about Ehud. Ehud is a judge ruling, his tribe, and he wants to kill the king of Moab because Moab is doing to Israel what Putin wants to do to Ukraine, and so they're going to kill the leader. And so Ehud gets an audience with the king, and he straps a dagger on his right thigh, and he goes in to tell the king that he wants to have
holy shit, you're right.
Yeah. And he whispers in his ear something, and he pulls out his dagger with his left hand and sticks it in, and kills him through his stomach. And then he puts him on the latrine and shuts the door and tells everybody, he's relieving himself. And he goes away. And then half an hour later, they find him dead. So Ehud, the only left-handed judge.
Wow, I've never made that connection before. But you're right. Like, I'm familiar with the story. Like,
yeah, Moody Bible Institute.
That's wild. If we do have time, I have one last question that I sort of thought about. It's interesting that you said that you never set out to write these books for the general public because, those are the ones that I've read, not all of them, but a vast majority. You're so well known for that, but then you're also this very well established biblical scholar. You're a professor. There's so much more that seems like these books for the general public, like to you, are sort of like an afterthought in the grand scheme of everything that you focus on. But at the same time, because of these books, you have been so influential on the majority of people, I think, who are deconstructing their faith and leaving Christianity. And so it seems, do you feel that in a sense you've sort of become this, like cultural icon without intending to be, or like sort of this beacon of aid for so many? And I think it's clear that you didn't intend to do that, but now that from my perspective it has happened, like how does that make you feel?
So a couple of things I'll say. I mean, the thing was, I wanted to be I just wanted to do scholarship. I just wanted to analyze Greek manuscripts and to do that for my life. And so when I'd written my book, Orthodox Corruption of Scripture, my editor implored me to write a textbook on the New Testament for undergraduates. I had no interest in doing that. And so I said no 3 times. I ended up doing it. And then I kind of liked it. And I thought, well, maybe I'll do a popular. So I did a trade book. And so it all kind of, one thing led to the other. But it wasn't my plan. But it turned out I've had decent communication skills because I taught in churches. I was a youth pastor. teaching I had like 14-year-olds, and I would do a Bible study on Philippians. I had to explain to them why Philippians was interesting. It's like, oh my God. And so like, you have to figure this stuff out. So I got good at that kind of thing. And so I will say, I do not have, I know that a lot of people have found this important to them in terms of leaving the faith and things, and I'm all for that. But I'm not trying to get people to leave the faith. I actually have no trouble with people staying in the faith. I just want them to know something. I don't want, I want them to understand what the issues are, and then to come to their own decisions rather than jump on anybody else's bandwagon. And so I'm really not trying to deconvert anybody. My closest friends are all Christians, and I'm not interested in making somebody not. But if people are, I want to be of service to people. I want people to understand what historians and other scholars know. And the worst thing is that you have all these scholars who know amazing amounts, and they don't tell anybody. It's like, that's not right. Yeah. So it's one of the things I'm really committed to, both with doing the books and doing these debates and doing my blog, which is a big deal for me. It's a very big deal for me, and people don't know about it. Just look up the Bart Ehrman blog. And I've started this little business where I'm doing these courses. So if people just should look up my website, and they'll see the various courses I've done, the bartehrman.com. And so, yeah, I mean, it does take up a lot of time, but it's really worth it. And it's a small little world that I'm in. So it's like, in 20 years, we're all going to be dead. Nobody's going to remember me anyway. It doesn't matter. Like, this is not what matters. But I'm just trying I believe in trying to help people as much as I can.
Yeah.
Your work is definitely helping a lot of people, believe me. Speaking of which, you mentioned your blog. To everyone watching, I highly recommend Dr. Ehrman's blog, not just because it's full of really good stuff, but because, one, it's only like $3 a month, I think, and all the proceeds go to sheltering the homeless or feeding the homeless. Is that correct?
Well, I've got several charities that we support. The blog's been going on for 10 years. I post 5 times a week, 1,200 14 a day.
How do you do that?
10 years, and you have access to all the archives at some ridiculous amounts, like $3 a month. But all the money goes to charity, and it's growing over the 10 years. It's like, I thought when I started this thing, I thought, I'll make maybe $20,000 a year and donate it, and then maybe see if I want to keep doing it. Last year, we raised $360,000, and we're dwarfing that this year. And so it's like, and it all goes to. I did before I came on your show. I did a fundraiser for Doctors Without Borders for the Ukraine thing, and we raised $4,000. And so I'm going to do another fundraiser for Ukraine in a couple of weeks, and so people should think about it, because you get like an ungodly amount of stuff for your money about all this stuff we're talking about tonight, and lots of other
ungodly
stuff. Like it's like you don't have to pay much, and all the money goes to charity, like good charities, dealing with poverty and homelessness. Man.
I've been a subscriber for a few years now, and I have never regretted it once. It's insane how active you are. I don't know how you sleep, but you do so much, and I'm so grateful.
Like, even if you're a Christian, like. This is highly recommend this.
There are a lot of Christians on blog, and
this is not an atheist source. No. This is for everybody.
Most of the stuff I talk about in the blog, most of the stuff I talk about in my books, are things that I learned when I was in a seminary training to be a minister. But the basic stuff. I mean, I've gone beyond that, but I mean, and so this is not like crazy wide-eyed. It is quite crazy light. Me, but it's stuff that is standard historical scholarship that most scholars know, but they just don't tell you.
Yeah. So I don't want to take up too much more of your time, because we're already over. And by the way, Dr. Ehrman usually only allows an hour, and for my show, he agreed to 2 hours with no extra charge. So thank you so much for that. So I don't want to take up any more.
I'm hoping that helps me into heaven.
Well, it'll help people attend your debate that's coming up. Hey, shameless plug. I heard someone say earlier that the link in the description is not working. It's just plain text. It's not a clickable link. I'm sorry. I'm going to go in here and fix that. But again, April 9th, Dr. Ehrman is going to be debating Dr. Michael Licona on the resurrection, or the historicity of the resurrection. It's going to be an all-day long event, and I am very excited for it. I'm going to eat exclusively popcorn that day, and we're going to have a good time. So
I will not be drinking wine all day when I'm debating him.
Oh, but if only you did. That I would
No,
take about it.
I'll play that for afterwards.
Yeah. Oh
all
gosh.
right. Well, thanks again.
This has been really great.
Yeah.
So
I'm glad you enjoyed yourself, and I know we did. This was really cool.
This is really generous of you. Thank you.
All right, guys. Thanks y'all for watching. And we're going to end things there. Again, friendly reminder, I have no idea how to end my shows. So, oh yeah, we're doing an after party on my Discord server. You can find the link in my bio and all that good stuff. Okay. See you guys there if you're interested. Thanks again, Dr. Ehrman.
Thank you.
Yes, such a pleasure.
Again, you too, Jen. Thank you.
Yeah, anytime. You don't have to twist my arm. This has been fantastic. Okay.
Bart, you want to come on with Bart Ehrman? So sorry if I noticed.
Okay.
All right.
You're right.
Again, bye, everybody.
All right. See you.